So, welcome everyone to this episode of Feeding the Wolf of Possibilities. And today we're going to explore if it is possible to get better at sex. And my guest and guide today is Chris Hughes, who is my favorite sex expert. So, welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much, Katarina. I'm excited to have this conversation.
So, how did you start learning about sex?
Wow. I think it was always a natural curiosity for me. Like, you know how in some families, the children get sat down at an early age when the parents think it's appropriate that they need to learn about the facts of life and how biology works, etc. In my household, it was the opposite. Much to everyone's embarrassment, I was like, right, I need more information. And I sat my mother down and had her explain to me how everything works and draw pictures. And this would have been before the age of 5 that I said, okay, I need to know. I want to know. I just always was quite sexual and intrigued that uh, our bodies had this natural capacity to experience pleasure. Like that, I'm sure at that age, that's what it was for me, that I was curious about the pleasure side of things. Like I remember like feeling a piece of fabric run across my skin, or like feeling like the juice of an orange drip down my chin, and I have really visceral memories of that even when I was like a really little kid, and I was always just alive with my body. And the interesting thing about that is my mom was desperate for one of her kids to be an athlete. And while I'm not an athlete at sex, I have had some athletic sex, but um, I always thought that bodies was not really my realm because I was never that interested in sport and athleticism. But
Right.
I'm realizing, I'm just having this realization now talking to you that actually I've always been super in tune or in touch or plugged in to the sensations of what was going on with and for my body.
Right. Well, I mean, if I look at it, most people don't even get to have that conversation. You say parents sit their kids down and talk about that would be amazing if all parents actually sat their kids down and had that conversation. So I would say
Yeah.
that often not even that happens. So one of the things that I've been looking at a lot is like a lot of people have the only information they have access to is what they see in movies, maybe porn flicks, or possibly from friends to a certain extent. So if I would say most people are quite uneducated about sex.
I would agree. And we have to also acknowledge that this is very cultural. Like you are from
Sure.
Scandinavia, and Scandinavia is open minded to sex to a certain degree. And there's certainly a very different culture about non sexualized nudity in
Yes.
Scandinavia. Okay. I live in Australia where it's interesting because people think Australians are quite laid back and quite open minded about a lot of things. But in actual fact, they are not necessarily all that open minded. And public nudity, like even in a public dressing room at a gym or a pool, is people are quite uncomfortable with here.
Mm.
So there's education and there is a lot of cultural influences that really come into play as to where you are from and what you grew up with as okay and normal. I am a little weird in that I grew up with a mother who liked sex and didn't see anything wrong with it. And I am forever grateful for that.
Well, so if you look at, so you actually, I totally agree with the cultural thing, and that's actually it's very different, and it's very different. It's so different that you don't even know the difference because it's part of our presumptive ways of looking at the world. So we even presume that other people have very similar non-educated or educated parts of their sex sex world. So you actually facilitate classes about sex. So, can you talk a little bit more about what that's like when you're traveling around the world? Because you will then meet all these different points of views about sex and will come up in the class.
Absolutely. And it's points of view about sex, it's points of view about gender and bodies, it's points of view about all kinds of things. I just did my first sex class in Cairo, Egypt, to an audience that was, I'm fairly certain from memory, it was 100% Muslim. Um, Two differing levels of devotion to their faith, but still, I was a bit shocked by some of the questions that were coming from people because in that part of the world, there is almost no access to
Yeah.
any education, or what they're told and instructed um, with is usually fear. I mean, I had a woman ask me if she willingly had sex with her husband, does that make her a slut and a whore? I had another woman ask me, she said, look, she is having premarital sex as a Muslim woman, but only anally because she's worried that if it's discovered on her wedding night that her vagina has been penetrated, that she will be put to death.
How do you answer, like, how do you facilitate people who ask those kind of questions?
Look, Kat, I think it's really dangerous and really glib to assume that our Western point of view is correct.
Yeah.
So I never want to disrespect anyone's culture or anyone's religion or tell them they're wrong. I had a conversation today with somebody here in Brisbane, Australia, and this is a young man who is 29, and he's had sex with one person in his life, his wife, and he waited until marriage to do that. And um, he is living a very traditional lifestyle. I, by contrast, can have multiple sexual partners at any given time as a gay man living in the 21st century where we have really managed HIV and we have all these new drugs that make sexually transmitted infections nearly impossible to get. It's a buffet out there at the moment, if you choose it. But that doesn't make me right,
Yeah.
or him right. It's you just, so when I'm presented with that, I let them know what their religion or their culture teaches them isn't wrong, but it also isn't right. And you've got to look at what's true for you.
Mm. Mm. Which is also part of consciousness, where, like, you these classes are actually facilitated from the point of view that everything is included and nothing is judged. So, you, tell us what the class is called and what the target of it is.
Cool. It's called In the Beginning. In the beginning, dot, 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 there was sex. And that's a bit of a play on sex as creation rather than procreation, and sometimes as recreation.
Yeah.
Um, and the target of it really is, and my target in general with everything I do, because similar to you, I have a podcast about sex. And with all of it, my aim is to invite people to live without shame around sex, without fear around sex, and to remove all the judgment and stigma so people can find out what's true for them. Because we're told all these strange things. We're told we're right if we're slutty and having a lot of sex, but we're wrong if we're slutty and having a lot of sex. And we're right if we're not having a lot of sex, but we're wrong if we're not having much sex. Like there's so
Yeah.
many judgments and conflictual messages, and we're like, what's true for me? I have met some people that are truly asexual and have no interest in sex and don't like sex. And again, what my aim is to remove the shame around that and go, okay, so what?
Well, so this is also because what I was wondering about is a lot of times we think we the key to learning better sex is to have sex and like learn from that. But what you're also what you seem to be working with is actually removing the shame, blame, guilt, whatever we have around sex. It doesn't allow us to actually explore and receive and find out what's true for us. So what does that do? What does it do when you have a lot of that shame, points of views, presumptions in the way?
Great, great question. Because I mean, you started this conversation with you wanted to talk about
Getting better
how
sex.
better sex, right?
Yeah.
Well, what I've discovered is most people have no idea what their appetites and interests are sexually. And the shame and the fear and the judgment is really what's stopping them.
Mm,
Or in actually a majority of cases, it's also not that. Sex has been weaponized against them, either through abuse or through validation or through manipulation. And so they've learned that sex is this, like, it's not a source of pleasure and joy and expression and caring and healing and nurturing. It is this weird thing. Um, so you got to get all that stuff out of the way first and then go, right. So fear wasn't real. If judgment and shame weren't real, what's true
right.
for you? And
Mm,
then and then you get to send people shopping basically to have a look around and go, what are my interests sexually? What does work for me sexually? Like we've all been in a position with a partner where we've got to express what we like and what we desire and what we want them to do for us.
mm,
But many people are not comfortable doing that.
yeah.
Many people are presented with that and they go, I don't know. I guess I like it this way.
I think it's the one time where we really expect the other person to be a mind reader. It's it's like they're supposed to just know what.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and that's so cool. So I had a sexual experience in the last, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 months now, where I met this guy online and he said, hey, I just want you to know I am a trans man and I have a vagina. And I went, hmm, okay. And I said to him, I was really honest. I said, I've never had vaginal sex before. And I
Mm,
don't want to treat you like an experiment. And I don't want to fetishize you for being different and like tick something off a list. But I am turned on by the idea, and you're a very attractive person. So I'd kind of like to explore this with you. And he said, thank you. Thank you for being honest. And thank you for telling me. And I said, I'm going to have to be really communicative with you to make sure that you're having a good time because this is foreign territory for me. And then before I met with him, I called our mutual friend, Dr. Dane here.
yeah,
And I said, dude, I'm going to have vaginal sex for the first time. And I've never done this before. Can you help me? What do I need to know? What tips do you have for me? What can you show me? How can you? And the man spent 30 minutes on the phone with me, helping me and explaining to me what were some good things to do, some not so good things to do, and more about the anatomy of the vulva. And it was incredibly helpful, and it resulted in an amazing sexual experience. um, Most people aren't willing to have that level of communication and of going, okay, if I want to be better at this, I need more information.
yeah,
So
yeah.
many people refuse to seek the information because of shame and fear.
Yeah, it's a lot of avoidance of even asking. There's a lot of nearly like I should know this, so I can't even ask, or I'm just not going to even ask not to find out something that I'm not ready to know. So the very act of you calling, Dane, for me is even in that like asking for information, you are doing something that should be so natural. But still, it's probably the last thing that most people would do. Call a friend and ask them how to have this particular kind of sex. So in your classes, when you then have a whole group of people from different parts of the world, and sometimes, all Muslim, but I'm just saying, like, in all the different ones you've done, for the first time maybe ever, they have somebody to ask. There you
Yes.
are, and they're allowed to ask you questions. So what are some of the most surprising, some of the most common, maybe, like some of the questions that you get asked in those
Uh,
classes?
I The first one that I did was in January of this year, and it was strictly online. And I had this one woman after on the second day of class, after processing and all these different conversations, and I will never forget how vulnerable she was. She said, "Hey, I took your class because I've been married to a man for the last 30 years. I've never enjoyed sex with him. I've
Mm,
always wanted to experience sex with a woman. And I've decided it's time that I leave him. We're still best friends, but leave him and explore sex with a woman. And because of your class, I got over my point of view and thinking it was wrong. And I found a female sex worker who was willing to show me the ropes to have sex with a woman for my first time." And I was like, I mean, that wasn't a question that she asked me, but I was like,
yeah.
cool. This is you starting your life in a new way,
Mm,
your own sexual reality where you get to start to find out what's true for you. And I was humbled with the level of honesty that she was willing to have. Because there's a lot of people out there suffering things that aren't working for them. Like there is one particular thing called vaginismus, which a lot of women have suffered from, where uh, penetration vaginally is quite painful. And
yeah.
most of the causes of that are actually psychological rather than physiological. And with these classes, we can address the energy of it and
Mm,
start to shift it and see some pretty miraculous changes. I mean, we've done that with people having difficulty with erectile dysfunction or premature ejaculation, with vaginitis and vaginismus, with any range of things. Honestly, Kat, what people ask me, I am always delighted and surprised.
yeah.
Um, it's it's as you say, I get to be there for them, but I feel like I'm the lucky one because when people reveal themselves to you in that way with that kind of vulnerability, it just makes you like go, "Oh, thank you. You are putting a great deal of faith and trust in me to have your back and not judge you."
Mm. And again, for me, even the possibility of being given the chance to trust somebody in this particular area is so unique. And that actually goes for nearly every culture. That is something that is goes because there's so few places in most cultures where you actually would have somebody available that you could ask that has no judgment, that actually is, like you say, delighted by any kind of question.
Mm.
So I wanted to ask you about, so sex can be, you mentioned, like healing, nurturing, playful, like creation, and not just procreation. It can also be a very powerful part of life. Like it gives you a lot of access to your power, which is probably also why it's been weaponized in many ways. But I was wondering if you could talk about what happens when you start to explore this part of your life. Like what happens in the other parts of your life? How is it connected, or is it just separate? Which I'm guessing is not, but that connection between you, your sexual world, and the rest of your life.
For me, it's connected to everything. What it does for me is it opens me up to receiving.
Mm,
And once I am receiving more, because, when you're having really awesome sex with somebody that is intimate as well as erotic, um, there's that play where you're receiving them and you're getting off on them having pleasure and vice versa. And in order for you to do that, you really have to push your barriers down
Mm.
and um, allow your world to get bigger. Is the only way I can explain it. That might sound kind of cryptic and vague, but that's I've been dealing with a little bit of like heartbreak or heartache at the moment. And I did something this week that I really wish I hadn't have done. I went to have sex with somebody because I wanted to feel better temporarily. And it
Mm.
was totally about validation. It was, that age old thing that people say of, oh, the easiest way to get over somebody is to get underneath somebody else. And that never actually works for me. And it just reminded me of what sex is like when you are allowing yourself to be received, like
Mm.
really being vulnerable and letting yourself be a part of that person's world and take responsibility for their pleasure and gift to them, but then also doing that for each other, like
It's
letting
multi.
that person, yeah,
And there is a deep intimacy, like in that meeting, not in the kind of meeting you had to get validated, which I'm sure most people, well, many people listening to this know what you're talking about, but the other
mm,
kind of meeting where you allow this simultaneity of gifting and receiving, there is this deep intimacy that for me is one of the things that a lot of people actually long for in life without even really knowing they long for it. So is there a way with that particular, like the intimacy and the oneness, how is that connected with, I know it sounds strange, but learning about sex? Like what is it that, can you learn to have that? Can you learn to go deeper in sex?
yeah, you can. And it's all about allowing yourself to find the partners that can help you with that. What you need to really do, if you would like to find this, is you need to get rid of your checklist.
Mm.
So many of us have a type. We're all about, and women, for some reason, women have this thing about height. They don't like a guy shorter than it. He has to be taller. I don't know. It's just something I found really common. And you've got to get over your type and teach yourself to look for the people that aren't going to judge you, that are actually really turned on by you. See, I got divorced 2 years ago and had to do this. I had to look for people that liked me, that were grateful for me, that were turned on by me, and that wouldn't judge my body.
Mm.
And once I found that, then that opened the door to totally different sex. And it has transformed me physically. It has given me so much more of my youth and vitality back. Like science is now saying that if you have sex, intercourse with another person 5 to 6 times a month minimum, your life expectancy is 20% longer. They're
Wow.
saying that if men have an average of 21 orgasms per month, there is almost no instance of prostate cancer.
So even physically.
There are a multitude of benefits.
which makes so much sense. Like literally our bodies are this, they're part of a symphony of things changing. We only know like a fingernail of how magical and mysterious our bodies are. And but it also goes into, your class is about in the beginning and creation. So this also takes it out of the only reason to have sex is procreation, because even physically there are lots of other reasons to enjoy this way of playing with our bodies that we've been given.
And you have to have a look at what creation actually is. Like, to
Mm,
most people, creation is, they've equated it to creativity. It's like it's the same as being artistic, but creation is anytime you allow yourself to receive and allow your life to grow and expand and allow your awareness to
yeah.
encompass something new. So when you
Mm,
find sexual partners like that, so in access consciousness, see, you and I both looked to a lot of the consciousness work that we do is through access consciousness. And
mm,
we have these three questions that we advise people to use when they're looking for people to have sex with. And you ask, will it be easy? Will it be fun? Will I learn something? And I'd love
yeah.
for people to take those and play with them. But I have a fourth question that I also ask. I ask, if I have sex with this person, will they give me more of me?
Oh, I like
And
that.
yeah, and I've been asking that, and the people that have been showing up in my life have been quite amazing.
Mm. And it also again, it broadens or widens again the space from where you look for your new sexual experiences, because you are actually the questions you're asking makes that space so much bigger.
Mm.
So if we're going to round off a little bit, but if somebody's listening to this and really don't know where to start to find their own sexual reality, to even to get better at sex is a play at a judgment, but if it's just about finding out what's true for you with sex, what could they start with? Where would you They could start with listening to your podcast, of course, and we'll put that in a link under. But what else could they start playing with?
Um, there's a lot of different things. Even just go to a sex shop and walk through the aisle in the sex shop and notice what you have a reaction to and what you have absolutely no interest in. And see, like, there are a multitude of different activities that you could try sexually, whether that's being tied up or being spanked or trying on costumes or whatever. That stuff's not as relevant to finding your sexuality, or your not your sexuality, your sexual reality,
Mm,
but it still is helpful to go and find out what's true for you and what actually does excite you. The
mm,
other thing is, if you're not in a monogamous relationship, the apps that we have access to these days are quite interesting, because we're in this swipe culture, right? Of like looking at all the different people. I would invite anyone who's in that market to start looking differently at the people. And instead of looking at who's the right height and the right age and the right color and the right whatever, start looking for who has the least judgment,
mm,
and and who actually likes sex.
mm. Well, it's interesting because what you're suggesting was not what I expected, which is wonderful. And it is about practice. You're suggesting playing and practice. So could you just, at the very end, could you just talk a little bit about that? Because that is such a key, I think. It's that explorative part.
It's like anything. Like the first omelet you make, you might not work. It might break when you fold it. So you make another omelet. I
Mm,
mean, it sounds funny to talk about sex like that, and we have been sold by the media this idea that when you meet the one, it'll be fireworks and electricity and you'll just explode together in this bliss of enjoyment. Sometimes that does occur. Sometimes you meet somebody and the chemistry is that.
Mm.
And sometimes it takes a minute to like imagine dancing with somebody for the first time. Sometimes it's fluid and easy and fun, and sometimes it's awkward and clunky, but when you go back the second time it's easier.
Yeah.
With all of it, if you dance together enough times, you start to learn more about how that person moves, what they like, and how they are in the world. And so you can start to build that intimacy and explore more together. Is that
Mm.
analogy or metaphor like too remote, or
Yeah.
do you get where
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, that works. And also that people are different at dancing every day. Like one day, maybe their foot hurts, and then they're dancing slightly different than
going?
another
Right.
day where they're like super, has so much energy and they want to dance fast. So there's also dancing is a great analogy.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
well, and there's any number of factors, but what people do is they dance with that person or have sex with them for the first time, and it's not perfect, so they jump to the conclusion of, oh, I'm not interested in this person, this isn't fun.
Mm, mm. Which is a conclusion and a judgment together, which then stops any further development. Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. If people want to explore with you, where do they find you?
Well, you can jump on my website, which is mrchristopherhughes.com. You can look for me there. I'm on Instagram as well at Is My Hair Too Big? And on my Instagram as well, I have pinned on my grid a link to an anonymous question link where you can send me questions about sex that you want answered that I will answer on my podcast. And then you can tune into the podcast called Between the Sheets. It's on iTunes and Spotify and YouTube, and you may get your question answered live on the air for free.
Thank you. And I just have to say, I think the world is so lucky to have you in it, talking and exploring and playing with people with sex.
I
So
feel I feel that like the world is awfully lucky to have you.
thank you. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast, Feeding the Wolf of Possibilities. I hope you have more space in your world now. If you would like to listen to earlier episodes, share with other people, or subscribe, please go to Spotify, iTunes, or visit katrinavalentin.com/wolf.